The desert sun sat high over Arizona, beating down so hard the land itself seemed to shimmer and breathe with heat. Jake Carter rode steady along the trail, the reins held loose in his hands. The smell of dry earth, leather, and sage clung to the air, as natural to him as the sweat on his brow. At 25, Jake had spent more hours in the saddle than most men twice his age. He knew cattle drives, broken fences, and long nights beneath a sky so wide it could swallow a man whole. Folks in town knew him too, quiet, polite, always tipping his hat, but never sticking around long enough to share more than a word or two. What no one truly knew, though some suspected, was that Jake Carter had lived his whole life untouched by a woman's hand. He had never taken a girl onto the dance floor at the saloon, never leaned close when the fiddle played soft, never pressed his lips to a lady's palm. He wasn't bitter about it, not even ashamed. It was simply something he had never figured out how to reach, like a fence just a little too high to climb. His thoughts that afternoon were simple ones: supplies he needed to fetch, beans, flour, maybe a new bridle if the price didn't bite too hard. He was not expecting fate to step into his path. But fate often had a way of doing just that. From the edge of the mesquite thickets ahead, a figure came into view. Jake slowed his horse, squinting through the glare. What he saw stopped him cold. A young woman, lean but strong, her buckskin skirt decorated with beads that caught the sunlight. Long black hair hung in a braid over one shoulder, and her eyes, dark, sharp, and unafraid, met his with such directness it unsettled him. "May I ride with you?" she asked, her English careful but confident. Jake opened his mouth to answer, but before a word left his throat she moved, light and sure, and swung herself onto the back of his horse as though it belonged to her. She settled in behind him with an ease that rattled him more than the desert heat ever could. Jake stiffened, his hands gripping the reins tight. He had never been so close to a woman in his life, and now her hands rested gently at his sides, her warmth seeping through his shirt. The faint scent of wild sage from her hair rose with every gust of wind. His heartbeat thundered against his chest, loud enough he swore she must hear it. The trail stretched before them, winding between dry washes and scattered cactus. They rode without words, the only sounds the creak of saddle leather and the rhythm of hooves on baked earth. Jake, usually so grounded, felt strange, every detail sharpened, every moment magnified. The brush of her knee against his, the sun burning across his back, even the steady rise and fall of her breath, all of it felt like something new, something he had never known he'd been missing. By the time they reached the edge of town, the streets were alive with wagons, riders, and the voices of traders. But all movement seemed to pause as people turned to watch. A cowboy and an Apache girl riding together. It was a sight sure to draw whispers. Jake slid down from his horse outside the general store, and she followed, standing tall, her chin high, unbothered by the weight of all those eyes. Jake, on the other hand, felt them like hot coals against his neck. Two ranch hands lounged against the hitching post, grinning with a cruelty that made his jaw tighten. "Hey, Carter," one of them called, his smirk broad. "Didn't figure you for the type to buy yourself a squaw for company." Their laughter rang sharp and mean. Jake turned away, hoping to ignore it, but the woman did not move so quickly. She met the ranch hand's gaze, her stare unwavering. The smirk faltered on his face before she finally turned and walked with Jake into the store. Inside, the air was cooler, thick with the scents of flour and kerosene. Jake busied himself with his list, keeping his eyes on the shelves, while the woman wandered as though she were taking stock of another world, touching cloth, brushing her fingers over jars of candy, studying each object with quiet curiosity. When they stepped back outside, the ranch hands were still there, waiting. One of them spat into the dust, his eyes narrow. "Careful, cowboy. Keep her with you, folks'll start talking." Before Jake could answer, the woman moved like a rattler striking. She seized the man's wrist mid-reach and twisted just enough to make him stumble with a yelp. In the same motion, she plucked a knife from a nearby table where someone had been cleaning fish, holding it low, the blade glinting in the sun. Silence swept across the boardwalk. Even the horses seemed to still, tails frozen mid-swish. The man, pale now, backed away muttering, "Ain't worth it." Then he vanished into the saloon. Jake stood there in stunned silence. He had never seen anyone move with such quick, sure power, like lightning striking dry ground. She said nothing, simply returned the knife to the table and strode toward his horse as if nothing had happened. They left town without a word, swallowed again by the wide, empty country. The sun sagged low, painting the hills jagged against the sky. For a long while, only the wind spoke. Then her voice came soft but steady from behind him. "You've never been with a woman before, have you?" Jake's hands tightened on the reins, his ears burning hot beneath the brim of his hat. The Arizona sky stretched wide and endless, the sun low and fading into streaks of gold. Jake Carter sat stiff in the saddle, the weight of silence between him and the Apache woman pressing heavier than the desert air itself. Her hand rested lightly on the saddle horn, close enough that he could feel its warmth even through his shirt. He tried to focus on the trail ahead, on the sound of hooves striking hard earth, but it was useless. Her presence was too near, too sharp, like fire brushing against his skin. She broke the silence at last, her voice carrying over the wind. "You've never been with a woman before, have you?" The question struck him harder than a fist. Heat rushed to his face, and he was thankful the dusk hid it. His throat felt dry, but he managed to speak. "No, ma'am." His voice came out rougher than he wanted, the words scraped raw. For a moment he braced himself for the laughter, the mocking he had known too well from others. But it didn't come. Instead, she let out a soft sound, something between a chuckle and a hum, touched with kindness rather than ridicule. "Maybe," she said slowly, as if choosing each word with care, "I'll teach you what it means to ride with someone." Jake swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't dare look back at her, but her words settled inside him, warm and confusing all at once. No one had ever spoken to him like that before, like she saw past the silence, the hard work, the weathered skin. Like maybe he was worth something more than just another ranch hand. By nightfall they reached a shallow creek. Jake gathered wood, trying to keep his hands busy while she knelt at the water, washing the dust from her face. The moon climbed high, silvering the grasses and throwing shadows long across the land. When the fire was lit, they sat across from each other, the crackle of flames filling the quiet between them. Jake cooked beans in a battered tin pot, the smell rich in the cool night air. He handed her a plate, and they ate without many words, the sounds of crickets and distant coyotes filling the silence. After a while, she spoke, her tone simple and steady. "My name is Tia." Jake looked up at her, surprised. It was the first thing she had shared about herself. "Jake," he said, though she already knew. She nodded as if tucking it away somewhere. "You live alone?" she asked. "Mostly. Got a small place west of here. Work the ranch, keep to myself." Her dark eyes reflected the firelight as she studied him. "No woman waiting for you." He gave a short, awkward laugh. "No, never had much time for that kind of thing." She turned back to the flames, her voice softer now, almost like she was speaking to herself. "Maybe time finds you when it's ready." The words lingered between them, settling deep inside him. He wanted to ask her what had brought her to his path, why she was alone out here, but he could see in her eyes that it wasn't something she was ready to share. Not yet. When the fire burned down to embers, they lay on opposite sides of camp. Jake stared at the stars until his eyes ached, listening to the creek's steady trickle and the rhythm of her breathing. Sleep didn't come easily. His thoughts churned like restless horses. It felt as though the ground under his life had shifted, and he no longer knew where the trail would lead. Morning came soft and pale, the sun touching the ridges of the hills. They rode westward, the desert waking around them with the flutter of birds and the quick leaps of jackrabbits darting across the trail. Tia rode with an ease that made her seem a part of the land itself. Jake felt the nerves building in him as they drew closer to his cabin. No woman had ever stepped inside that door. The place was plain, just a single room with a cot, a table and shelves holding the few books he owned. He braced for her disapproval, but she only glanced around once and gave a quiet nod, as though it would do just fine. While he tended to the horse, she fetched water and began setting the cabin in order, moving through it with a natural ease that unsettled him. For years, The place had been nothing but empty space. Now, somehow, she belonged in it. That evening, they sat on the porch as the sun bled into red and gold. Tia leaned against the railing, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Without warning, she said, "You're different." Jake turned his head toward her. "How so?" "You don't talk much," she said, her eyes still on the sky. "But you listen. Most men only want to hear themselves." He didn't know what to say to that, so he stayed quiet, shrugging a little. But inside, something shifted, like a locked door creaking open in a house he hadn't stepped into in years. For the first time in his life, Jake Carter wondered if the long, empty trail he had been riding all these years had finally brought him somewhere worth stopping.